like to welcome our speaker, Michael Hood, Professor Emeritus, Clemson University, who's an expert in wax moth, among other things.
All right, yes, I think that word expert is used loosely, but I did write a couple of articles for Bee Culture back about 15 years ago, I guess, and it was sort of a series on wax moths. It just so happens in the United States, we don't have a lot of scientists who work with wax moths. We've had too many other issues, such as varroa mite, small hive beetle, other viral disease. So wax moths have taken a back seat, but yet wax moths are still present. In fact, wax moths came from probably from Europe when we first had honeybee colonies brought into the country. The settlers brought with them their colonies of honeybees, and with them probably brought in their wax moths. Now, as you might know, there's two kinds of wax moths, two different species, the greater wax moth and the lesser wax moth. Both are found in the United States, but most of my presentation is going to be on the greater wax moth, which is the pest that we have the biggest problem with, especially in the Southeast, in the southern United States. In the warmer climates, we have tremendous problems with wax moths. The lesser wax moth, on the other hand, can be found in our colonies sometimes, but yet, as you read in, I think it was Gleaning, ABCXYZ, I read that the greater wax moth will actually consume, the larvae of the greater wax moth will actually consume larvae of the lesser wax moth. So the lesser wax moth becomes very unimportant at that time. However, I will specify that anything that we relate to control of the greater wax moth should also control the lesser wax moth. So it's still a concern. But our first photo here is the adult wax moth. As you know, moths fly at night. And what happens is they will go into the colony almost undetected by the guard bees, and they lay their eggs in cracks and crevices in places that the honeybees really can't reach. But as the female adults lay those eggs, the adults will probably remain in there the rest of the night, and then the next morning they exit the hive, and then they go into the vegetation or trees and they become inactive for the day. Now, an adult wax moth can live about 2 weeks. And during the female lifetime, she will lay 200 to 300 eggs. Each adult can lay that many eggs. So what happens is, in a live colony of bees that's healthy, as soon as those eggs hatch, which it takes probably 3 to 5 days for those eggs to hatch. When they become hatching, the young larvae begin moving around in the colony, and a good healthy colony of honeybees will remove them, actually drag them out of the colony and kill them. So that's a good thing, in that our colonies sort of police the hive of the wax moth. However, if the colony becomes weak because of queen failure or of starvation or disease or any other situation, many times the wax moths, those small larvae, can move around undetected and therefore do damage. We'll talk about that during our presentation. This is a photograph of the eggs, which are laid, as I mentioned, in cracks and crevices, away from where the honeybees can get to them. But normally you see 30 to 50 eggs within a little mass in the cracks and crevices. If the colony really gets infested and gets weakened, then they just lay their eggs all over everything. So you see these quite frequently. All right, now the larvae are the life stage that does the damage. You see in this photograph a few different life stages of the larvae, the young ones that have just submerged, but you also see the large larvae. But their goal is to consume mostly pollen, brood, larval skin of the honeybee that have been shed. So that's their protein. But in the process of going and eating that, they will go through and damage a lot of wax and eat the wax, the comb itself, and all that wax goes through their body and flushes out. But they have to have that protein in order to grow. By the way, the larvae will remain active for probably 15 to 20 days sometimes before they pupate. Here we have a mature wax moth larva. It is about almost an inch in length. But notice you have prolegs on the left, on the head end of the larva, and you have these abdominal legs on the mid to rear of the larva. Now, this photo shows a mature wax moth, greater wax moth on top, and then a small hive beetle larva on the bottom. Notice that both larvae have the prolegs on the right underneath the head there, and then only the greater wax moth has the abdominal legs. So a beekeeper really needs to be able to distinguish between the two larvae here to know if they have the greater wax moth or whether they have the small hive beetle. I've learned a good field test. You don't have to be able to identify these larvae as to whether they're wax moths or whether they're beetles. You can simply pick up one of the greater wax moth larvae between your fingers and mash it, kind of press on it, and it will actually explode in your fingers. Whereas the small hive beetle larva, the exterior is very rigid and will not explode. It's very tough. So that's a good field expedient way to tell the difference between whether you're looking at wax moth larvae or whether you're looking at small hive beetle larvae. The small hive beetle larvae do not get much greater than 1 centimeter, as you notice in this photo. But at one point in time, the greater wax moth can be about the same size as the small hive beetle. So you can't determine on size alone which one you have. All right, this is a varroa mite sticky board trap, which I have used many of those over the years in research. And I've noticed that wax moths wind up on those inserts on the sticky boards many times. So they will occur in strange places. Now, let's talk for just a minute, especially the new beekeepers. This is simply a frame of drone comb from the brood box. This is your capital investment in a colony of bees. This is something that needs to be protected from the wax moth, because if you don't, this can occur. This is a frame that has been damaged by the greater wax moth. And if you look real closely, you'll see the golden or the yellow appearance. That is pollen. That is what the wax moths primarily are feeding on or trying to get into their bodies. But in that process, they go through and damage the comb. Also, they leave behind the webbing. So if you see webbing of this nature on a frame, you know it's the greater wax moth and not small hive beetles. Small hive beetles do not result in webbing. And this is the result. If the wax moth really do damage, they can completely destroy the comb from a colony, and you left behind with a frame with the wire. The only thing you can do here is to replace that with foundation and allow the bees to draw the comb over. But remember, as the saying goes, it takes 8 pounds of honey to produce 1 pound of wax. So do you want your bees to produce wax to replace damaged comb, or do you want to have them produce honey that you can extract and consume? So this is what you want to avoid, is damage. Now, if you happen to be a beekeeper and you go on vacation and your colony is weak, especially in the Southeast, wax moths can move in quickly. And if you're going on vacation for a couple of weeks, you come back and you take the lid off the colony and you hear this crunching noise, which is a terrible thing to hear because the wax moths have completely destroyed that colony. Not only there's no bees there, but they have destroyed your frames and all your comb. About all that's left there is probably to burn this complete hive. Even the larvae will bore into the interior sides of your supers, the boards. The larvae spin their cocoons. They actually bore into the wood and will leave behind these scooped out damaged areas. So wax moths can do quite a bit of damage, not only destroy your comb, but destroy your woodenware also. Now, let's talk just a minute about control. You'll see a nice queen with a pink mark on her. Hopefully this is a young queen that will produce plenty of bees. And this is what you want in the summer and in the fall of the year in order to control your wax moths. Because if you have plenty of bees policing the comb, they're going to remove those wax moth larvae when they hatch from eggs. So this is a good situation to have a good young laying queen there. Now, doing that can be difficult these days. I struggle myself keeping good queens going, but this is something that you need to be mindful of, that if you can keep a good strong colony with young laying queen, then it certainly would take care of your wax moths. And this is the result of a good strong colony of bees. You have so many bees in there that the wax moths cannot survive. And this is true of the small hive beetle too, by the way. This is our first recommendation in controlling the small hive beetle, is to keep a good strong hive of bees. All right, let's talk just a moment about a wax moth trap. You will notice this is a 2-liter soda bottle. And what we do is we cut about an inch or about a quarter in size hole in the shoulder of the bottle. And we put some ingredients in there. We put in there 1 cup of clear vinegar, 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of water, and 1 banana peel. Now these, don't ask me which one is the attractant. I don't really know, but this is what I've heard over the years will attract greater wax moth adults. and you can place these in the apiary. However, I will warn you, we did some little pre-tests for these. And remember, you put a cup of sugar in there along with the vinegar and the banana peel and the water. And we had one trap I never will forget. It filled about half full of worker honeybees because there was a dearth at that particular time. There was nothing for the bees to go after in nature, so they went after the trap. Now, I would have thought the vinegar would have repelled the bees, but it didn't. But there's something in this combination that is attractive to wax moth adults. And it is something that you could make without very much trouble. Now, another way to control wax moths, as you have read or you've heard, good ventilation and good light is the way to control wax moths in your stored equipment. And this is where we have the biggest problem with wax moths in the Southeast, and perhaps where you are, is in your stored equipment. After you extract the honey, I like to extract the honey and set the supers out. And I like to let the bees kind of clean up the residual honey for about a day. Now, I don't like to let them clean it up for more than a day because they'll start damaging your comb. But right after they have cleaned up the honey, residue honey, then you have to store them somewhere. And an older gentleman up in Oconee County in South Carolina showed me the way that he did it successfully. Was in an attic where he had his supers stored, and he would hang those supers on the right here, like shown on the right, getting good light ventilation, light and ventilation. And he claimed to never have much of a wax moth damage problem. And when he did, if you only have maybe 5 or 10% damage of your comb, your bees can build that back without much trouble. So a little wax moth damage in your stored equipment is not a major problem. All right, at Clemson University, we have a storage building, equipment storage building, and this is where I store my supers of comb that I want protected from wax moths. In our hot, arid area, climate, wax moths are a big problem. So we have to control them at all costs because they will destroy the equipment. And this is a building, it's about a 7 foot wide by about 15 feet long with a wooden floor, a nice roof over the top, and over the windows, I've got hardware cloth or screening to keep the bees out because the bees are attracted to that area too. And we don't want bees getting in there, and we don't want wax moths for sure, the adults to fly in there and lay eggs. So we have the hardware cloth screening on the windows, and we get plenty of good ventilation. It freezes there in the wintertime, so it's a good situation. I took another photograph inside the building, and you'll notice that I have the supers of comb stacked. And it's best to have at least 2-inch, minimum of 2 inches between supers. I've also read where it's good to have at least 6 inches to be sure between supers. But you get enough light and ventilation in there if a wax moth does get into your storage area, that they should be able to do very minimum damage. Notice also I've got one of my traps stored on one of the supers there, just in case the wax moth adult does get in there, maybe I can trap it. All right, this is a photograph from Argentina. It was taken in 1976 in a publication. And this is a safe storage room for wax moth control. You could easily make one of these. What we have here is racks of frames. the beekeeper would take the frames, the drone comb, out of the supers and put them onto these racks, and keeping a certain distance between racks. Never had a problem with wax moths. Notice got a roof over it to keep the rain off, but you can imagine the ventilation and the light here. This is a good way to control wax moths. Ross Conrad published the article in Bee Culture back in October 2009, and he had a very similar situation here. So this is a good way to control wax moths, is to store them in an area where you have good light and ventilation. All right, let's talk about wax moth deterrence. We've already talked about the strong colony of honeybees for a live colony. And we talked about ventilation as a deterrent, light, and we haven't talked about broodless comb yet. If at all possible, you need beekeepers, if you can keep brood out of your honey supers, you have very minimum chance of getting wax moths in those supers, because there's no pollen. Very little pollen would be there if there had never been any brood in that comb. So if you can have broodless comb, you can go a long way toward deterring the wax moth. Another way is Sertan is a BT product. You may have heard of this. This product was used for many years, long time ago, but it was taken off the market because it had to be re-registered, and the manufacturer didn't want to do that. Well, under some pressure, I guess, I don't know, from these various companies, they brought this product back on the market in the United States. And you can, as far as I know, legally use this. I would say you probably need to check with your regulatory agency to make sure it's registered in your state, but I would bet it would be. But this is a bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis. You mix this with water and spray it on your comb on both sides of the frame before you store it. This is for storage of drone comb to protect it from the wax moth. But the wax moth, if they do come in contact with it, will consume some of the bacteria and die. The bacteria doesn't have any effect on your honeybee larvae later on. So this is a product that is available to you. But I will warn you, if you're going to use this product, you have to spray or apply it to every frame, both sides, in order to get good control. Because if you miss a few frames, they will do damage there sometimes. But this is a fairly safe material, and there are other BT products out there, but they're not specific to wax moth control. So it's got to be this Sertan B402, I think is the name of it, which Man Lake carries it and Daydent both. All right, in the Southeast, we have this pest called imported fire ants. Certainly hope you don't live in an area where there's fire ants, because they're more of a problem. But sometimes we can use an insect like this as a benefit to us. And this is fire ant adults stinging a wax moth larvae. And I have a beekeeper that down in Saluda County in South Carolina who was using, really he claimed to use fire ants to control his wax moth, but what he was doing is he was stacking his drone comb on wooden pallets, and he was crisscrossing the supers where the frames were all crisscross. So he got some light and ventilation vertically, but he also claimed that he felt that the fire ants were controlling the wax moth. Notice there's a lid, there's a top here to keep off the rain off the equipment. So I did a research project back in 95 to 97, and sure enough, he was right that if you stack your equipment like this, where there's fire ants, you could control the fire ants and get very good. You could control the wax moth and get very good control. But many people are concerned more about the fire ants for controlling them than they are the wax moths. So it's a tough situation. And the fact that you've got to have a high rate of infestation of fire ants to get 100% control. But anyway, it is out there and some beekeepers use it in the South. But I don't think it's worth importing fire ants to control your wax moths there in California. It is a controlled pest, so hopefully you don't have them. But on the flip side, you could also stack your supers horizontally here, 4 or 5 deep, and I like to put a queen excluder on each side so that keeps out mice. But this would be another way of controlling the greater wax moth. Notice I got a lid on top of that to keep the rain off. All right, so there are other methods of wax moth control. One which I like to do is to leave a super of empty comb on a strong colony of bees to protect it. They protect the comb from wax moths. If you have enough bees in the hive, they will protect it. So you can put an empty super up there, even in late summer or fall or winter, and you can store a super that way. Number 2 there is you can freeze the comb, which I like to do when I take honey off, extract it. I like to let the bees clean the honey off, and then I put the supers into a deep freeze them for 2 days, and then I put them in cold storage. 48 degrees is about the temperature at which wax moths do not develop. So as long as you kept the temperature below 48 degrees in cold storage, you'd be fine. But first of all, I put them in a freezer and freeze them for about 2 days. Now that's going to depend on a lot of things. If you put a lot of equipment in there that's been out in the sun, it's hot. I have seen wax moths in supers that I put in there to kill the wax moths. I have seen them actually go into a cluster and stay warm for more days than I thought they should. So I had to leave the equipment in there for more like 3 or 4 days in order to kill all the wax moths. But when you put them in a freezer at that temperature of 32 degrees Fahrenheit or below, you leave them in there for 2 days. And obviously you're not putting wax moths in there with them. You're just doing it for control. Freezing will kill all life stages, the eggs, the larvae, the pupa, and the adults. So that should finish it off and then put it in cold storage and you should be good to go. Another way of controlling wax moth is with carbon dioxide. I've never done that, but I've read about it, of making a chamber and fumigating with carbon dioxide. I understand you got to have a lot of equipment to make that happen, but it is a possibility. And then we have the product. I'm a full believer in integrated pest management, which really means that you use all other control techniques and then you pull out pesticide last. In paradichlorobenzene, PDB crystals is considered a pesticide. It comes in a container like this. You can buy that from your bee supply stores. But what you do, it comes in crystals, menthol crystals, and you put about a tablespoon on a piece of newspaper on top of the frames in a honey super. And then you can stack these 4 or 5 deep and make sure you tape everything and get everything all airtight. But the Paramoth is, the crystals are a fumigant, and it's actually heavier than air, and it will fumigate down through the equipment and kill any life stage of the wax moth with this product. The only drawback that I have using this product is you will have residues of this menthol in your comb. As you know, beeswax is sort of a sponge. Whatever it comes in contact with, you'll have some residue left. And this is one of the reasons we can't sell our honey to other countries such as England, is because pretty known fact that we use paramoth, or some beekeepers use paramoth to protect from wax moths. So if you use this product, use it carefully. And what you do after you have used it, let's say over winter, and you pull those supers out to put on your colonies the next spring or early in the year, you have to air out the supers for about 3 to 4 days to get that menthol odor out, because it could might be repellent to your bees. All right, that pretty well concludes what I had to present. And we can take some questions here if I can figure out how to make that happen. All right, Lloyd has a raised hand.
Yes, so a couple of questions was, wouldn't the queen excluder exclude the moths from going into the supers anyway?
Yes.
So couldn't you use that with the storage as well? I mean, I know they're a bit expensive, but if you stacked all the supers up and put a queen excluder on the top.
Yes, you're going to stand a chance of having some mouse problems if you stack them vertically, like we showed. But hopefully, you know, that won't happen that much. But the reason I showed it the horizontal, it's so easy for them to access and get in there. So yeah.
Okay, I just figured if you stack them so that, and put the queen excluder on top of the stack, then how would the moths get in?
Well, you're going to have those openings where you crisscross. You're going to have some vertical openings there
So,
at the ends. But you could put an excluder on top. It might help. But I would
I'm just
say,
saying, what's the other reason for crisscrossing?
to increase the light and ventilation.
Right, but is the light and ventilation only for resisting the wax moth?
Yes.
So if you didn't crisscross them and stack them,
You're going to have you're going to have it enclosed where you're asking for wax moth problems. If you just stack them like you would a beehive, you're not going to have any light or ventilation at all.
I see. So in other words, if there was maybe larvae inside, then they would just grow.
Yeah, if there's larvae in there, you're going, yeah, you could have some damage.
Okay.
Hopefully the air, the ventilation and the light would deter other wax moths from getting in there.
I see. Okay.
Hi, I have a question about the BT. How come it doesn't kill the bee larvae?
Yeah, the BT product has been developed for killing just the wax moth larvae. And we're talking about the wax moth being Lepidoptera from a different order, as opposed to honeybees being, you know, not Lepidoptera. So for some reason, it doesn't affect the honeybee larvae, although they might consume some of it. It really doesn't bother them.
Do I recall correctly that there are many species of BT, so you have to be careful about your species?
Yes. Yeah, you should only use that product, Sertan. That is the one that has been developed just for wax moth. The other thing is, remember that the wax moths are actually going in there and chewing the comb, whereas the honeybees would not be chewing. But I feel certain that the BT does not become a problem for the honeybees. And this product has been around for probably 50 to 60 years now.
So one thing that's worth repeating probably is that a white comb from honey supers, as long as it hasn't had multiple generations of larvae grow in it, is probably pretty safe from destruction by wax moths. So you don't have to go through the elaborate freezing or preservation schemes as long as it's pretty white.
Yes. Am I
Mike,
showing
does that-
up here my photo?
Not yet.
Okay.
So Mike, does the BT product work on both the greater and the lesser wax moth?
The BT product
Yeah,
is, I can't answer that question, but I would suspect that it does. It should be on the label, which I've never used BT, but you could contact the supplier and they should be able to tell you what's on the label. But I would suspect it does,
we
because
have a local commercial.
the greater wax moth and lesser wax moth are very closely related.
I've looked into the BT product and we can't get it in California legally. But if you have friends out of the state, perhaps you could acquire it that way.
Okay, if I heard you correctly, you mentioned that it's not registered for use in California.
Right.
So that is something you probably need to stay with and not use that product.
Right.
You might talk to your regulatory officials and see if they could get it registered if you have a desire for it or a need for it. Perhaps there's not enough wax moth problems in your state for the product. I just don't know.
Yeah, I've seen it available on Arbico. That's I think it's Arbico Natural Pest Management or company. They sell that, but they sell various strains of it, and they say it is for the wax moths.
Okay.
Is there a similar product for small hive beetles?
No. There has, to my knowledge, there's never been a product developed that would control small hive beetle like that.
I found a paper some time ago where there is a strain discovered that targets varroa mites, but I don't know if it's been developed into anything.
So does the webby stuff that you see on the combs, is that the same stuff that the wax moth build their pupa?
You mean when they pupate? Yes,
Right.
probably the same material.
Okay.
In fact, the lesser wax moth, there is a disease, it's called ball brood. And what happens there is the lesser wax moth kind of traps the honeybee larva in the cell, and the cell is never capped over. So you have all these what appear to be bald cappings where larvae don't mature. But what happens is the lesser wax moth has entrapped the honeybee larva down in the bottom of the cell. And the way you can see that is you can see the excrement, the little pellets of waste from the wax moth on the honeybee larva is one way to identify that. But it's called bald larvae.
If wax moth were imported into the US with honeybees from Europe, is Europe where they're originally from, or some other part of the
I've
world?
read where they're originally, they think, from Asia, but they spread very quickly all over the world because of beekeepers moving colonies such as they did from Spain into the United States and Germany into the United States. So wax moths can very easily be transported in.
Or their eggs?
Eggs and larvae and pupae. One thing about the life cycle really slows down when it's cooler weather. So they could be transported by ship, you know, and for weeks, and the larvae could remain protected there in a holding area, and they would successfully make the trip unless they got frozen some way.
Well, many caterpillars have wasps that parasitize them. I wonder if in their home range there is any wasp that might parasitize wax moth.
I think there has been some work done by USDA, but they've never come up with a good parasite. But yet that might be something that they could investigate further.
So it seems also that keeping the humidity low is an important feature of any wax moth storage thing. That's why the attic storage works, so that the wax moth eggs don't turn into larvae. Does high humidity?
Yes, probably humidity has something to do with it, but temperature probably has a greater difference there. I would think temperature is the main factor.
Hi there. That's kind of a segue into my question. So I'm a first-year beekeeper, and I did notice I have one hive, but I have a little practice hive set aside, and I found a moth in there that kind of looked like it was a wax moth, and I of course dispatched it as quickly as possible. But I was curious how you had mentioned earlier that dry, arid kind of climate at Clemson. I'm smack dab in the middle of a dry, arid climate here in on Crow Canyon, and I'm wondering how that impacts the wax moth, how prevalent they are around here.
If I said dry, arid, I did not mean that. I meant humid. We have a humid area here, warm, humid climate, and that's perfect conditions for wax moths. Now, if you're talking about dry, arid, that would probably go pretty good ways in controlling your wax moths, I would think. And there, you know, it's unusual then that I'm sure there's some areas, dry arid areas, where there's no problem with the wax moths because of that, probably. But I'm sure that it does have some role in the control.
I'm wondering then if the drought that we're experiencing right now then would help control the wax moth and maybe keep them down.
It might, yes, and the temperature can play a major factor there too. But yeah.
Good, thank you.
All right, Christy.
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Moving dry air seems to be an important feature of controlling wax moth, because if they're in still air, like frames stored in a plastic garbage bag, for instance, that's asking for trouble.
Yes, I would say the movement of dry air would be very beneficial in controlling your wax moths. And one thing you new beekeepers is be careful and don't extract your honey and then put your empty supers in a black trash bag and wrap them and secure them. You think that you don't have any wax moths, but what happens is during all your extracting process and removing your honey from the colony, you're going to have some wax moth eggs in many occasions, and that's true in the Southeast. Now I don't know about your area, but if you put those supers in a black plastic bag, you're going to come back and open them up in about 6 months, and you're going to have a mess. You're just going to have destroyed comb.
Now, I put mine in a black bag, then I freeze it.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, as long as you can freeze it, kill all life stages, and then have it in a plastic bag that is secure where they can't get in, that should take care of them.
It seems to work.
Yes.
One of our past members, Judy Casale, said that she would actually employ the wax moth in her bee operation. She would pop the old dirty combs out of frames, the combs that had been in for 5 or more years, put them in a plastic bag and put it in some nice, pleasant environment. And a few months later, she'd open up the bag and shake all of the castings off of her nice cleaned up plastic foundations, and they would be ready to put back into frames.
Did you see that? I thought she was being sarcastic.
I believe it completely.
Yeah, there is that saying now that with all the, if you're using any kind of pesticide or whatever you're using to control your pests and your disease, that any of that winds up in your comb, your wax, and you have a buildup, and that could occur over time. So there's some, especially in the Southeast where we have to control various pests, we recommend that you don't hang on to that old wax for more than, say, 5 or 6 years, which goes against the grain of what I was taught as a young beekeeper, that you, as long as you protected your wax from wax moths, you could use it forever. But now that's not the case. If you're using some kind of pesticide or whatever, you're going to have a buildup there. So yeah, the wax moth will destroy that comb in that plastic bag, and you'll have just a nice clean frames that you don't have to do much with to put foundation back into. That's a good idea.
Just don't put the wood in there, because they'll do very great damage to the wood.
Yes.
She pops the foundations out of the wood frames first before storing them that way.
Mm-hmm. You know, we talk about wax moths, so there's got to be some benefit in nature. And Jerry and I talked about this earlier, what I've always heard, that let's say you have a feral colony in a hollow tree in your area, and the colony dies to American foul brood. And the good thing about wax moths is they will move into that dead colony and destroy all the comb and actually eat the wax. And therefore, the only thing that I can think of that would benefit here is there would be nothing there but debris and waste. Now, Jerry and I had the question, does the bacteria remain active? But yet, you know, if the wax moths destroy the comb, there's very little there for another honeybee to come visit, or a scout bee, or for a swarm to go in that same hollow if there's no comb. So in the long run, I think that, yes, they can be beneficial in that situation, because if the wax moth didn't destroy that comb, that would be a source of contamination for your healthy colonies, because they would go out and visit various sites and bring back spores of foul brood.
And they're good fishing bait.
Yes. Steve Tabor, who grew up in South Carolina, may have heard of Steve Tabor, the old USDA bee scientist. He grew up as a young beekeeper, and one of his favorite things was raising wax moths to sell to the local fishermen in the Columbia, South Carolina area. So yeah. And I've also run into beekeepers who lost their bee colonies, and they said the wax moths just killed my colonies. Well, it wasn't the wax moths that killed your colonies. It was either queen problems or disease or pests or starvation, something else weakened the colonies, and the wax moths just finished them off. And I tell them, well, it's time to go fishing.
Have revenge.
Yeah.
There's another larva that I've seen in the hive or in stored equipment that's smaller than or about as small as the small hive beetle larva, and it seems to be called the Australian sap beetle. And it seems to love to eat pollen stores out of stored frames. Do you have any of that in your neck of the woods?
I just never have heard of that. I'm not saying we don't have it. I'm sure if you have it, we probably do too, but
Everything gets spread by the almond pollination?
maybe. You have a lot of bee colonies brought in there, and I'm sure they bring everything in the world to visit. So yeah, you might have something we don't. I just don't know, but I'm not familiar with that.
I have a question about the method by which adult moths get into the hive. Around this time of year, we're putting robber screens on. Has there been any work done to see whether or not robbing screens will prevent wax moths from getting in the hive as well?
Okay, I'm not familiar with robber screens. I'm familiar with the reduced entrance little insert that you place there. But the problem is, now these screens you're talking about, they do allow bees to get in somehow.
Right.
Is that true? Okay.
Yeah, the idea is that you move the entrance away from where the smell of the hive is emitted, so that foreign bees or wasps or other predators will be attracted to what they think is the real entrance, but that is in fact not where the residents of that hive can enter and exit the hive. And so my thinking is that perhaps moths would be attracted to where they think the entrance is, but it may not be able to find the true entrance.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the wax moth adults might be attracted to the odor of the hive, so they might seek out that entrance. I would say if the bees can find it, those wax moths probably can too, but I don't know. That somebody should probably look into that. It might be a deterrent. I don't know.
So when wax moths are not inside of a hive, where are they? I mean, do they live out in nature and eat other things and populate? Because, I mean, there aren't that many hives. And then all of a sudden there's wax moths all the time. And so it seems like they live elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a very good question. However, if you just think about it, there are honeybees normally within a few miles in any direction you go in the U.S., either feral or managed, and they could probably they're excellent flyers, so they could seek out the odor of a colony of bees at a great distance. Whether they have alternative food source, I can't answer that. I don't know for sure. But they might be specific to beeswax. I just, or honeybee colonies. Yeah, good question.
Do wasp and yellow jackets have the same issue?
As far as being a problem,
Yeah, having wax moths invade and eat their comb.
well, the only issue with yellow jackets that I've ever seen is when a colony becomes very weak for whatever reason, and it can't protect itself. And very similar thing with wax moth. It just can't keep the wax moths under control. I've seen yellow jackets get into colonies and disrupt them and take honey and feed on perhaps the larvae because they are meat eaters mainly. But I've only seen that happen a couple of times. We seem to have enough pests in the hive to take care of it. But yeah, I've seen yellow jackets a time or two, but colonies got to be extremely weak.
I think Phil is asking whether the wax moth parasitize the yellow jacket nests like they parasitize honeybee nests.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. That's a good question too. Yeah. Yeah, I just don't know the answer to that one.
Well, have we exhausted the?
I've got a quick question. I just extracted and let's see, I like to store my frames in clear plastic bins with a plastic top that's not on there really tight. But I did freeze all the frames, and so I'm wondering if this year I'm going to try to see if I can get the frames through the next 6 months or so in these plastic bins that store like probably 10 frames. And I don't know if the wax moths can get, the top is not sealed perfectly. I'm not sure if it's worth like taping the top onto the top of the bin. But anyway, I haven't done that before. And I'm just wondering how stealthy and how persistent the adults would be to get in. But I did freeze all the frames before I extracted, so hopefully there isn't anything there, but who knows?
Yeah, that's a very good thing to do, is to freeze the frames and you kill all the life stages. But then wax moths can be persistent. Now, these bins are stored in the open air or inside a building or what?
In my garage. And the bins are clear plastic, so it's light in there, but the garage gets closed up, so it's during the day.
What kind of temperatures do you have in your garage? Is it?
It's just well, it can be warm on a hot day,
Yeah,
it can get pretty hot in there. So,
well, there's a chance wax moths could get in there, but if it's an enclosed area, chances are it won't happen. But anything's possible when it comes to wax moths because they are very persistent.
Yeah. Well,
I have found that that wax moths get into those plastic bins in my basement. Just FYI.
And then I wonder if you just if you taped it shut, would that just create a real problem? I mean, I'm not sure what would happen in that.
You would think that if you freeze the comb and put it directly into the bin and a lid on it and then tape it, there really shouldn't be any way that those wax moths should be able to get in there.
No, but then you can have hive beetles.
Well, hive beetles too, one of the ways of controlling hive beetles in comb is freeze it too. So they don't survive in freezing weather.
I have just gone through an epic experiment with freezing, carbon dioxiding, freezing again. And when I went to clean out the boxes, the hive beetles started moving around even the larva.
Let me ask you, how long did you freeze the equipment?
Some a week and some have been in there since last harvest.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's hard to believe that they
it was
survived.
really hard to deal with.
Yeah,
I opened
that
up the
does-
freezer and there were beetles that had crawled out from underneath one of those covered plastic boxes. Just disgusting.
And you sure there's no way beetles could get in there any other way, or?
I don't know, because I had the plastic tub with the plastic lid clamped on.
Yep, well, anything's possible.
They're more resilient than I ever wanted to think they could be.
Yes.
But that's a topic for another day.
Yes.
I think that's today's topic, isn't it?
Hive beetles?
Or
Not
well,
hive.
just the idea of freezing.
Yeah, on the small hive beetle, I published a book about 4 or 5 years ago on the small hive beetle, and it gives you a lot of different guidelines on how to control small hive beetle. And if you're really interested in that, you might get a copy of that book.
So this year I tried the crisscross method,
Mhm.
and I was okay with it. I think I got some damage, but not not stuff that I had to really throw away. So I think it seems to work. I have it in a little shed with screen on it, so it's indirect light. It doesn't ever get any direct light.
Yeah, 5 to 10% damage is not a real big issue. The bees can easily build that back without you having to clean it out and start with foundation.
So Mike, how much will the bees clean up the wax moth damage, the silk and so forth? Are they okay at pulling the silk out and some of the damaged stuff?
Now, what was that question?
Sorry, there's a motorcycle going by at the same time. The silk that some of the wax moths leave in there, are the bees okay at cleaning up some of that?
Yes, the webbing. Yeah, that will become an issue, and that is because if you get more than 10 or 20% damage, you need to replace that comb probably with foundation.
Or at least cut out the bad spots.
Yeah, I think the bees could clean up some of that webbing if it's not too much, but there's always a limit.
So what happens if they can't clean it up? Do they just reject the frame, or what happens?
I think a good strong hive of bees will take care of that and probably repair that comb, or should anyway. If they've got other comb that's not being used, they'd probably go there. But if you've got a real good strong hive of bees, I think they would repair that damage, use it, that part of the comb.
So Hal Liskey's on, and Hal, you use that BT product, don't you, Hal?
The Excentari. I can't tell, am I muted? Yeah.
You're fine.
No,
now.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I use that Excentari.
Excentari.
That's the brand name. It's a biological insecticide that's used for worms and grubs. It's similar. It's got a big long biological name which I don't know, and I find it very effective. It's used throughout the world. One of the brand names that it's under is Certin, CERTIN. That's the way it's sold. And I think that Data carries it now for states that have approved it. It's just not approved in California.
Oh, okay.
It's one of those off, not labeled, not approved by the local government, but it works great. The only issue with it for me has been that the first year I used it, I sprayed it on and closed the boxes up, and the moisture mildewed the pollen a little bit. But I don't have wax moth problems.
So spray it on, let it dry, and then store them.
Exactly, Jerry. Yeah, I put the boxes out on, with 7 and an 8 frame, so I get some air circulation, crisscross them, set them outside for a nice hot day, and then I can stack them. And I just don't have any problem. It's not good for backyard keepers because it's $30 for a package. The $30 package lasts me almost 3 years though. So you use a teaspoon of it in a gallon of water. Or is it a tablespoon? I'll have to look at the directions. It's eliminated wax moths for me.
Because of the expense?
No, just because I don't have problems with them. And I've got a big commercial
I'm sorry,
freezer.
what was that?
I said I just don't have a problem with moths because I have a big commercial freezer. I used to freeze them, and this is so much easier. The time involved in spraying is an expense, but it's one of those things that if somebody wanted it and they wanted enough for a couple of gallons, I could sell it to them or give it to them. And I think those things are stuff we should think about doing in the club. So
you're saying just because of the expense, you don't think it's worth for a backyard beekeeper?
Yeah, if you're doing 8 boxes or 10 boxes, $35 is a lot of money, or 30. I think it's 30. If for me, I put away 40 or 50 boxes every year. Honey supers, the honey supers come off and they get stored in my winery barn. And in my former time with bees, that was one of the things that put me out of business. Is that I'd put the honey supers in there in the fall, and I just had so much bad report on that commercially available insecticide that the mothball type thing, that I didn't use it in the old days, but I just couldn't keep the moths out. But I wish this was around in those days because it just works fine with me.
Well, I
Yeah,
wonder
you'll
whether
probably
the wax
need-
from your honey supers was had some generations of bee larvae in them because they're after the protein, and they would not be after white wax.
Right. Yeah, well, you got dead outs and and actually they're not that selective. If they can find some stuff that they can feed on, they will go into other, and I use some dark comb for honey supers, when I need a shallow and I need it for honey, and there's one that's a brood frame, I use a brood frame.
Yeah, it seems to me that you all need to get with Daydant or Man Lake and see if they can get one of those BT products registered in your state. I'd rather see you legal there, but
yeah, the problem with getting things registered is there has to be money in it for the producer.
yeah.
And the producer funds that, and it's not a wholesaler's task to go. It's just like getting the oxalic acid gone. Getting that stuff registered, and nobody wants it because you can buy it in the dime store type thing. You can get it everywhere, and so there's no money in getting it. On the other hand, some of the mite treatments and those kinds of things. There's a lot of money in it. So they spend the money to get it registered.
Well, that's the issue with the Sertan product. Many years before, it wasn't even registered in the US, but beekeepers in the US were ordering it from Canada.
Right.
It was legal, and I guess they made the exception there, and someone got it registered in several states. Maybe your regulatory folks could help you out. I don't know. All right. Well, I have certainly enjoyed visiting with you beekeepers, and hopefully you've learned something, especially the newbies, and that you'll have a good year. So keep your wax moths and your beetles and your varroa under control, and hope you do well.
Thank you very much for sacrificing your evening for us.
Yeah.
I know it's much
Enjoy.
later on the East Coast, 3 hours.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going
Thanks,
to turn
Mike.
in and go to bed here. So y'all have a
Me
good
too.
night.